Shabbat Shalom and Hanukkah Sameach. So let's take stock of our good lad Joseph. Joseph has ended up down in the land of Egypt after having been sold by his brothers. There he worked for Potiphar, one of the captains within the hierarchy of Egypt. And while he was working for Potiphar, Mrs. Potiphar, she doesn't get a name of her own, makes some inappropriate suggestions to him that she would like this young Hebrew slave to entertain her, if you will. And to that proposition, Joseph says,
No.
No. He says no. At which point she falsely accuses him of the thing he refuses to do, and his master throws him into jail. There, while in jail, he is able to correctly interpret the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, or chief in charge of bakeries of Egypt, and this eventually will get him out into the land of Egypt as number 2 in the entire land. And when he stands before Pharaoh, and he is asked to proclaim his divination, to explain what the dream is, he says very clearly, it is not I that interpret, it is God. I am just doing what God allows me to do, and if God wants me to interpret, I will, and if God doesn't want me to, I won't. Well, that's not exactly a savvy move, because essentially he is saying that he's not all that special. Sure, he might have a little bit of an insight thanks to God, but on the whole, it's God doing all the work, and he just happens to be the messenger. Now, it's true, but when you are trying to angle for a job that's a little better than prison, maybe sell yourself a little bit more, Joseph. But he refuses to do so. And, of course, it does work out well for him. Likewise, when he encounters his brothers, he is still the man who recognizes them, and he is still the man who recognizes the Jewish trait of forgiveness. After a little bit of testing, don't get me wrong, we only get the final forgiveness of his brothers in next week's parasha, but clearly he has not adapted the ways of the vizier of Egypt, or else he would have simply murdered them all on sight. That's what power often does to people, but he is still holding on to his Judaism, despite at this point having been in Egypt for decades. So we can learn from this model of Joseph the incredible power of a single Jew to be able to live for decades as both a slave, as both a prisoner, as both, I guess it should have been also, because both is only for the 2, sorry, English teacher, blip, to also learn that even when he had power, he could still hold on to his Judaism. That it's not just about we hold on to our faith in poverty or we hold on to it in adversity. Even at the height of his power, he held on to the teachings of Abraham, Isaac, and his father Jacob. So if that's true, if one lone person in all of Egypt, awash in the idolatry and the immorality which is written about extensively by the Egyptians themselves on their own walls, if one person could hold on to their Judaism like that, why did we need the Maccabee revolt? Right? I mean, what was the danger? We had already outlasted the Assyrians. We'd already outlasted the Babylonians, who had attacked and destroyed the north and then destroyed the south, including the temple. And yet we were still Jews, and their empires were dust. And okay, fine, the Seleucids came along and they had all their idols and all of their Greek-style living ideas. But did we have to fight a war about that? How could that have been a bigger danger than the danger that Joseph faced when he was living in Egypt? And if Joseph could survive as one person in Egypt, then certainly as a group, we could have survived without a violent revolt, which was almost doomed to failure from the start, that the Maccabees led. So why Hanukkah? It's a different take on the question of my Hanukkah.
It also revolted within the Jewish community. There were some that wanted to be Hellenized and others that wanted to hold on to their Judaism.
So facet 1 to consider is that this was, in its original moment, a civil war. Something that is often downplayed as we try to emphasize Jewish unity, but at the beginning of this conflict, it was Jews that were appealing to Antiochus, the emperor of the Seleucid Empire, to give them more support to be able to overcome the Jews within our territory that were not interested in being Hellenized, that were not interested in worshiping Zeus and the other pagan deities, and they were appealing to the emperor to put the rest of us in our place and to break the traditions of our people so that we would fall in line. And the emperor was only too happy to try and move that forward. Did you have something else? Yes.
But weren't they trying to destroy the Torah? They were actually trying to get rid of the entire Torah, and we would have lost all the traditions that were given to us.
And as this clicks into place, we come to the second facet, thank you very much, Aaron, which is that the goal of Egypt was very different than the goal of Antiochus and the Seleucid Empire. That the Egyptians could care less of what Joseph worshipped, of what Joseph believed. Oh, fine, you say that God's making you do it rather than, Set or, one of the other Egyptian gods, whatever. As long as you give us the right advice, you're still in good favor. The Seleucid Empire had a different agenda. They were not merely promoting the Hellenistic ideal. They were actively trying to destroy Judaism. The forbiddance of Torah study, the forbiddance of the observance of Shabbat, of circumcising our sons, of keeping kosher. They wanted to make Judaism illegal, not merely promote an alternative. And that was ultimately where the revolt came from. Yes, Joseph was able to survive when he was not being pressured to give up and being asked to destroy everything he believed in. He was able to hold on. But a people that are being told that everything they are is wrong and that everything they believe must be abandoned, well, if we don't stand up at that point, then there will not be an us for much longer. Had we allowed the Seleucids to have their way, had we not revolted against them, then Judaism would have been extinguished because that was the specific policy. In the United States, we have often had a tension. For most of our history here, thank God, we have generally faced moderate persecution by the historical scale. Yes, there were jobs we couldn't go into, there were quotas at universities, there were places where we weren't allowed to live, there were restaurants and hotels that we weren't allowed to be customers at. Not great, obviously, but compared to the Seleucids, that was a step up as far as persecution goes. And the United States didn't tell us we couldn't be Jewish, they just limited what we could do if we were Jewish. Thankfully, most of that has gone by the wayside. But that doesn't mean that we can be lax, because anti-Semitism, as we have seen over the last few years, has had another resurgence. While it has not become government policy yet, thank God, it is something that we must be mindful of. We have already seen that being Jewish has become more difficult. To be openly Jewish in certain circles, whether it be a college campus or whether it be in certain nonprofits or involved in other civic affairs, can be more tense than it was only 10, 15 years ago. And that means that we have to recognize that we are moving away from the assimilationist tendencies of the Joseph experience, which we know how to deal with and have good institutions to prevent, and perhaps are drifting, in more of a direction of adversarial attacks, where Judaism becomes persona non grata within the borders. We must be vigilant, not just to check which way the weather is blowing, but unlike our ancestors whose only option was either to leave the country or to take up arms, we are blessed in these United States to have the ability to lobby, to speak up, to advocate for ourselves and for others in similar circumstances, and to say, no, this is not what our country represents at its best, and it is not a path that we are willing to let happen without putting up a proper civic fight. All of us, I'm sure, remember those civic classes and teaching us what we need to do when there is a problem within our community. Well, the problems are beginning to grow exponentially, and that means that we must avail ourselves of those tools. We must act with as much passion and vigor as the Maccabees, even without the violence that they had, unfortunately, to use as their last recourse. But nonetheless, we should use their example to defend our rights within this land, to defend our Jewish people around the world, and to defend everybody who deserves to be able to live freely according to their conscience and to be able to then be a blessing to the world as their heart will steer them. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.